So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angela Brackenreed. I'm an agronomist for the Canola Council of Canada. I live and have a small grain farm here in Justice, Manitoba, where I am working from today. I wish I could be in Montana. My parents actually are in Revelstoke right now, and apparently the snow is just insane for skiing and snowmobiling. There, I think Montana bound next. So too bad, but didn't work out for me today. Thank you for accommodating me virtually, Karen, and thanks for asking me to join you today. So what Karen and I discussed that I would talk about is stand establishment in canola. And I'm going to be honest that I approach this with a little bit of trepidation for a few different reasons. The last time I was in Montana, I think I was probably in diapers. And I am aware of the situation that a lot of you folks, you growers, were in the past year, and I believe have faced for the past few years as far as the drought concerns. I'm aware of the looming drought concerns for 2022. Also more familiar than I wish I was with the supply chain issues and ever escalation of input prices. The other thing is stand establishment. I've always struggled a little bit to talk about is it always comes across as sounding like I think it's easier than it actually is. So I guess I just want you to know that that I approach this knowing and respecting what it is that you folks are up against and what, you know, just the challenges that you face every year. So if it seems like I'm making some assumptions, this is easy, please know that I know it isn't. So in regards to establishing canola, we will talk about what our goal for Canadian canola growers is and why. And I think from what I understand, this should apply fairly well to you folks growing spring canola. And how do we get there? What are we currently achieving in the field here in Canada? And what are some of the reasons for that? We'll talk a little bit about the return on investment of optimizing our seeding rate, and I'll show you a tool that we have that maybe will be helpful for you folks in doing some of this. First off, though, I just wanted to briefly touch on who is the Canola Council of Canada. I've been with Council now since 2012, and I kind of skip this stuff now talking to Western Canadian growers. I think they're fairly familiar, but I thought maybe just a brief overview might be of interest to you folks. So the Canola Council is fairly unique in North America as it's a full value chain organization. We're not for profit that represents all aspects of the canola value chain. So at our board table, we have representatives from our grower associations, exporters, life science companies, and processors. So, you know, at times these there's large differences in opinion at the board table, and that can be a challenge. But it is a really great opportunity to get all of these people working towards common goals for the industry. Our members, I'm sure some of these are familiar to you. The way in which we are funded is, so in Canada, growers pay a checkoff when they deliver their grains, and this isn't just for canola, there's other organizations like this. And it goes directly to the provincial grower associations. So here in Manitoba, where I am, it's the Manitoba Canola Growers. And in that specific situation, you'd pay a buck a ton. And it automatically comes off your grain check when you deliver it to the elevator. And then in turn, those provincial associations decide how much they voluntarily want to contribute to the Canola Council of Canada. We have other voluntary contributions from the other associations and organizations involved. So at the Canola Council, we kind of broadly are involved in these three buckets of market access and competitiveness. So, I think a surprise to a lot of people is that a lot of the work that the Canola Council does takes us really far from Western Canada, working on, trade barriers, trying to get into new markets, etc. Sustainable supply, which is just a fancy term for what we're doing in trying to grow the crop, and canola utilization. So canola meal, canola oil utilization. We have an agronomy team, relatively small team situated across the prairies in the main canola growing regions of Canada. So in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, and in the yellow there is where the vast majority of the canola is situated. So Autumn Barnes, who would have been giving this presentation, has unfortunately left us and gone to Lethbridge College, but her replacement here in Southern Alberta would probably be the best point of contact for a lot of you folks. And I'm hoping that we will have someone there early 2022. So the Canola Council sets strategic vision for the industry every 10 or so years. And right now we're working on the goal of 52 bushels per acre average yield in Western Canada by 2025. And this is just a simple kind of graphic showing how we expect to get there. This took a lot of years to develop with lots of consultation with researchers and industry. So it looks like a simplification, but it was quite the process to get here. When we started this, we were working with a running average of 34 bushels an acre, and it was right around when I started with council. And to be perfectly honest, I thought, this is impossible. That is such a huge jump. And we were, on our farm and on a lot of farms, we saw pretty massive fluctuation in yields. And it's really just been until recently that we've seen, you still see those amazing 65, 70 bushels per acre that are not as common, but we seem to have a lot more yield stability than we did even 6-7 years ago. So we're 2017 to 2019 running average of 41 bushels per acre. Still, 11 bushels per acre is still a long ways to go in now not many years. So it's still a stretch, but it's starting to seem more realistic. And actually, the reason I wanted to bring this up is we're talking about canola establishment. What we had kind of determined with improvements of plant establishment is that there's an additional 3 bushels per acre that we could potentially capture with those improvements. Now, the challenge with stand establishment is, unlike fertility management, it's not exactly a one-for-one type relationship where, you get this plant stand that we recommend, and that automatically means you're gonna, see your 3 bushel improvement. But it is, arguably the most important thing on the farm that has an influence on everything else as you go. So it's more of an indirect relationship with yield. Not to downplay the direct relationship. I mean, we do know that there is a point where yield falls off if you don't have the stand established that's kind of in that optimal range. And our recommendation is 5 to 8 plants per square foot. The kind of stretch goal is 75% emergence, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. So I've been kind of in and out listening to some of these presentations, realizing that some of my units are probably not right for you folks, and I apologize for that. Plants per acre, 217 to 350,000. We don't talk this way at all. Like, we grow soybeans on our farm, and there's corn around here, but if anybody talks this way, we're all converting back to pounds or bushels or plants per square foot. So I'm going to keep mentioning it as we go, and hopefully with this kind of range in mind, you'll be able to keep track of what I'm saying here. So where did we come up with this recommendation? So something that I found out since working with council is it's very difficult to get rid of old or information online. So if you've ever been looking for plant stand information, you might find ranges that are quite a bit different from this. So prior to when I started, I believe it would have been 7 to 14 plants per square foot. And we updated that in the last few years. That 7 to 14 plants per square foot was primarily based on OP canola. So we commissioned a meta-analysis looking at only trials in Western Canada that were dealing with hybrid canola that we're only using today. And basically what this is showing us, so talk about units and not being right. So this talks about plant density per square meter. Even in Manitoba, people will be throwing tomatoes at me. We don't, I know those are the units that we use here in Canada supposedly, but nobody actually knows what it means. So just divide by 10 essentially, and you're close enough to plants per square foot. So 10 plants per square meter being 1 plant per square foot, et cetera, et cetera. And what this is showing you, so all the dots are yields as a percent of trial maximum. So you can see this was a lot of trials at different plant densities. And basically, we do know canola is incredibly plastic, and we can see great yield, like surprisingly good yields with low plant stands. But basically, so if you look at this 1 to 2 plants per square foot, yes, we did occasionally achieve 100% of yield, but we saw yield drop out pretty dramatically in a huge range of yields. When we get more into that recommendation that we're talking about, 5 to 8 plants per square foot, you see those dots all start to tighten up. Doesn't mean we're not ever going to see yield drop out. We absolutely will. But our probability of reaching our yield potential becomes much, much better. So hence the recommendation, and also showing that, once we get over that range, we're not seeing any convincing argument to having more plants than that. So not only do we want to see this, 5 to 8 plants per square foot, we would also ideally like to see that's 5 to 8 plants per square foot uniform across the field. So again, units that you probably don't know what the heck they are, but it's more the trend that matters here to show you why uniformity is so important. So on the bottom part of the graph, we're looking at what was low to average yielding sites. And on the top part of the graph, we're looking at high yielding sites. And what you're seeing is that uniformity became even more important in reaching yield in those low to average yielding sites. Important in the high yielding sites when we were dealing with low plant stands, uniformity was important. But once we got into higher plant densities, that uniformity didn't matter as much. The reality is, though, I don't think most of us go into a year expecting it to be a low yielding year. So the point is, let's go into the year and create a resilient stand, as resilient of a stand as we possibly can, to help us buffer some of these environmental things that are thrown at us. Okay, so those are the goals and those are the reasons for it. How do we get there? Our best management practices for seeding, and none of this is going to be groundbreaking or earth-shattering, but the basics when it comes to stand establishment are really critical. So seeding shallow, 1/2 inch to 1 inch deep, seeding slow. Now I don't have some general recommendation for how fast you should be seeding, but and there is the rare exception where, with certain drills, particularly disc drills, you might be better off seeding faster. But generally speaking, I think for any of us, if we could seed slower than we're currently seeding, it's probably gonna be beneficial to us. And often this is just, how slow can you tolerate? What is reasonable? What could you, at what speed could you seed at that kind of balances efficiency with this goal of a good seed bed consistency in seed depth. A warm seed bed is incredibly helpful. We've had some really challenging springs here the last few years, and seeding into cool conditions, and it just haunts you for the rest of the season. So if we can, we really don't want to be starting till at least 5 degrees Celsius, 41 degrees Fahrenheit, and ideally 10 degrees or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Hopefully I did those conversions right, and I'm not totally wrong in my numbers there. Very critical, particularly in dry years, save the seed row for seed and phosphorus fertilizer only, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And calibrate regularly. So my kind of basic recommendation, this isn't based in science, but it's just, we need a place to start. I recommend to growers that every time there's a 1 gram per 1,000 seed weight change, you should be recalibrating. And I think, again, you folks might be using how many seeds per pound. So for that rule, that'd be more like somewhere in the range of 10,000 seeds per pound. Every time you see a 10,000 change, you should be looking at recalibrating. And this is all pretty basic stuff, but the reason for slowing down, particularly as a lot of growers are moving to a side band, or putting all their fertilizer down in one pass, we just really run the risk of mixing, and we know how sensitive canola is. So we just did some demonstrations at some plots that we have, and the faster we went, the more likely we were to see seed bounce and mixing. And then we looked at stubble disturbance. So this is all stubble at the same height with a hole opener. So we were 4.1 miles per hour, 5 miles an hour, and 6.2. So you can just see, much more soil throw. You're going to have more extreme variation in seed depth when you're kind of covering those back rows with that soil throw. Okay, so I mentioned how important it is to save the seed row for seed and phosphate fertilizer only. This is, I believe, the most recent work we have in Manitoba on this. And so what we're looking at is on the bottom axis here is the addition of phosphate from 0 to 40. Again, you can pretty much consider this pounds per acre when we convert from kilograms to hectare. So 0, 10, 20, 30, and 40 pounds per acre of actual phosphate. So if you're using 1152, for instance, it'd be basically double that. And then the addition of 0, 9, and 18 pounds of sulfur in the green, blue, and black lines here. So if we first just take a look at the 9 pounds addition of sulfur, and we're looking at its impact on stand density, you can just see as we increase our phosphorus with that 9 pounds, we pretty dramatically on a pretty sharp downturn drop our stand density. You can see with even only phosphorus added, so 0 sulfur, we still do have a slightly less pronounced drop in stand density, but it is still there. For us, we really feel that the risk reward is there with phosphate, but it's not there with sulfur. So with phosphate being fairly immobile, being pretty critical to early season development, it's kind of one of those things that we accept the risk of some seed mortality with seed place phos. But when we don't really see a benefit to seed place sulfur, we just say get it out of the seed row. When you look at this black line and you go up to 18 pounds of seed place sulfur, even with no phos. We pretty dramatically cut our stand and have unacceptable seed mortality. And you can see in that example, the added phos didn't actually change it that much. So sulfur's clearly the critical component there. So likely not anything new to you, but just as a reminder of what increases the risk of fertilizer damage in the seed row. Low moisture, absolutely. The drier it is, the less safe seed place fertilizer is going to be. Low seedbed utilization. So seedbed utilization being your width of spread of your opener divided by your row spacing. On the marketplace today, we have large variation in seedbed utilization. So, not as common on these extreme ends, but realistically, we could see a range of 6% to 43% seedbed utilization in the market. So when you see generalizations that even I will give of, X amount of pounds are safe with the seed, you have to be really careful in the assumptions that were made when that recommendation was developed. So, when I'm talking about the generalization here in Manitoba, we're talking about typically good spring moisture, a pretty common setup of 1 inch spread, 12-inch rows, heavy clays or heavier clays, I should say. So we absolutely can't think of that the same when you're dealing with a much different drill setup and different soils. Lighter soils, so the clays in our heavier clays are going to hold more of our nitrogen in the ammonium form. So in a sandier or lighter soil, you're going to see more conversion to ammonia, and the ammonia is what is going to cause your seed and seedling damage. And kind of same goes for higher pH. So the more or the higher that pH is, the more free ammonia that you're going to see. So I think for you folks in Montana, I'm thinking that you're probably not as high a pH as what we would be here in Manitoba. Like it's actually quite bizarre. On our farm in Manitoba, we have a lot of pH in that 8 range, and I'm guessing that's much higher than what you folks are dealing with, and you're probably dealing with some lighter soils. So this is wheat, so please don't use this for canola. Canola is extremely sensitive to seed place fertilizer, where we would consider wheat to not be, but I just wanted to use it to demonstrate the impact of seedbed utilization and soil texture on seed safety. And what it's looking at is urea in the seed row. So in the example of a 1-inch spread on 12-inch spacing, in sandy soils, the recommendation would be 0 N. As when they added nitrogen in that situation, the stand loss became unacceptable. In that same seedbed utilization of 8%, you can safely place 10 pounds before unacceptable plant stand losses occur. In the sandy soil with a really high seedbed utilization of 50%, they found they could safely place 30 pounds. So just to demonstrate how different that can look. Okay, so our recommendations for seeding into dry conditions. We really encourage folks not to chase moisture early in the season, so no deeper than 1 inch. And a reminder that, as long as we're well packed and well sealed, we can be on moisture, not in it. And oftentimes, a good pack behind that operation will bring moisture up to the seed. So try and resist the urge of actually placing seed down to the level where it's got moisture all on the top and bottom of it. Typically we'll find with lighter textured soil, deeper seeding is okay. I wish I had a number for you, but still I would say, you know, in your lighter textured soils, we really don't want to be deeper than 1.5 inches. I'd be more comfortable with 1.25 inches. And, you know, part of the hesitation with recommending much deeper than this is we know that, you know, even in you know, drills that we've spent a lot of time leveling and you know, spent a lot of time ground truthing, we're going to see variations. So the deeper you go, you know, if most of those, you know, in most spots in the field, most of the openers are placing it at 1.25 inches, we still know that we're going to have those extremes where it's just far too deep. No more than 15 pounds an acre of actual phos with the seed. Again, careful of that generalization. Here in Manitoba, I would be comfortable in a lot of situations with more than that, but particularly in dry, lighter soils, I certainly wouldn't go any more than 15 pounds. And the deeper that we seed, I think the more critical it is for everything else to be right. So I know the temptation to start chasing moisture, as you know, particularly when we're dealing with extremes in drought, and we're getting later in the season dealing with you know, high winds. But I think as we start to do that, we just got to be careful that we're optimizing everything else, and maybe, you know, we're removing that fertilizer from the seed row completely. So, I mean, we can do everything right and then have all sorts of things hit us and wipe out some of those plants, you know, either pre-emergence or post-emergence. Extreme wind, I know, is something that in southern Alberta they deal with a lot. I'm assuming you folks do too. I don't know how common early season frost events are for you guys, but it's, you know, it's coming in pockets, at least throughout Western Canada. Flea beetles, our nemesis here in Manitoba in particular, it seems like the last few years. And if you have questions about this, we can, excuse me, we can dive into it a little bit more. I didn't want to get too much into it, as I think you could make an entire presentation on flea beetle management if it is something you're dealing with. It's cold season in Manitoba. You'll be happy I'm not there in person. So just a quick reminder, we recommend an action threshold of 25% defoliation on those cotyledons, and the term action threshold is a little bit different for this insect, but we just know that you can go from 25% to that economic threshold of 50% defoliation almost in a blink of an eye. In the last few years, it's just unbelievable how quickly we're seeing stands completely wiped out where, you know, in a reseed situation. So we recommend, you know, once you're seeing that 25%, you need to be ready to do something, to spray. We're also seeing a lot of stem feeding, particularly in these more severe environmental conditions, and that defoliation recommendation just no longer applies when it only takes 1-2 bites to get through that tiny little stem. So we just are recommending producers are really careful in looking underneath those cotyledons and checking for stem feeding. Cutworm damage, never anything that's widespread, but always pockets of cutworm damage. And this is a challenging one, as it's you know, it's typically not something that you're seeing across the field. It's in little pockets. So we really encourage people, well, obviously scouting, but you can effectively spot spray for cutworms rather than, you know, a broad foliar application across the whole field when it's only going to be in these small pockets. Hail and stormy weather. Anyways, the point of all that is more that we can try and do all of these things right, and then be hit with any number of environmental or pest pressures that really are out of our control. So it comes back to creating as resilient of a stand as possible to try and buffer some of these things that we know are going to be thrown at us. So if you are consistently seeing flea beetle damage, spring frost, high winds, etc., that are impacting your stand, then we would recommend being on the higher end of this plant stand range. So, perhaps at 8 plants per square foot is your goal, rather than 5. To make an informed seeding rate decision on your own farm, though, you really need to know your farm's average emergence percentage, or have some kind of background in this, or you're kind of just having to guess. So we can all do this. It just means getting out in the field, ideally at around the 3 to 4 leaf stage, and taking some plant counts. So take a hula hoop with you, make one. I've just made one out of some PEX pipe. So you about 2 square feet, you'd need 19-inch diameter or circumference of 60 inches. And that, we don't want to be too small, or you're just not getting a reasonable sample size. So make something like this, go out, at least a few fields every year to try and start getting an understanding of what you are achieving for emergence. And we know you're going to see variation from year to year, but at least if you get an average, you have a little bit of a starting point. This is just showing you how to figure this out in plants per length of row. But if you want to go through this, we have all this information available at Canola Watch. So canolawatch.org, and you can find all these calculations and start doing this next spring. To, in the end goal, figure out your percent emergence. I'm going to show you a tool that we have that can help you with this, and then you don't have to be writing down all of these equations, and you can just put it into an app and it'll do it for you. So once you start doing this, you may unfortunately be a little bit disappointed at what your emergence actually is, or if you were planning on having that let's say 300,000 plants per acre, you may be disappointed to find out that you really didn't quite get there. We've done some surveying over the years across Western Canada and have found that the majority of our fields actually are not in that optimal range that we recommend. And the majority of fields have areas that, even if they were in the optimal range, they have areas in the field that have, that are patchy. So, when we're talking about uniformity, we know that we are struggling to achieve that. We had a little, it's still going on actually, it's called Canola Counts. It's a little campaign to get producers and agronomists to start submitting their average emergence and plant counts spring and fall to us, so we can kind of track what we are achieving across Western Canada. And again, similar to what our assumptions have been through trial data, our average emergence is still hovering in, around that 50 to 60% range. It is, although it is our goal to reach 75%, we know that is a stretch in a lot of years, and a lot of things have to go right to achieve that. And this is just showing the submission of data for what that actual plant density was. Just it's kind of a neat campaign, and something that we're going to continue doing hopefully for a few years. Okay, so I said we have tools that can help you with some of this. So if you go to canolacalculator.ca, we actually, this is an old screenshot that I have. We have a few more tools that have been added here. The latest one that I was working on is a harvest loss calculator. I think you're going to have someone presenting here to you soon on harvest losses. It's a really great tool that can help you figure out what you're throwing out the back of your combine. But anyways, not the point for today's talk. We have these seeding rate and seeding cost calculator and target plant density calculators. So The seeding rate and seeding costs will do three different things. So it will calculate what your seeding rate should be with known variables, what your emergence would be, and your plant density. So basically you need to know your seed size, what your target plant density is, and your emergence. So if you don't have a good feel of what your estimated emergence is, we would recommend starting at that 50 to 60% until you kind of have your farm's numbers. And then it'll spit out in pounds per acre your seeding rate. So calculating your plant density, so you would enter in what your desired seeding rate is, your seed size, estimated emergence, and it kind of goes back the other way to tell you what that plant density would be. Or looking at trying to figure out what your emergence was with that same information. I use this a lot. It has a feature where you can save your fields and you don't have to do that legwork of keeping all this documented. It will do it for you. Okay, so as I was saying at the beginning, we've identified that 3 bushel per acre increase in average yield if we can optimize in stand establishment. And as I said, I don't necessarily think this is this direct relationship, but I do feel that we can do a lot to optimize our return on investment or our financials if we can optimize our stand establishment and start changing our seeding rate based on a plant density goal. I don't know what the situation is in Montana, but it has long been kind of the common thing in Western Canada to seed canola at 5 pounds, regardless of anything. It's just, that's what we seed canola at, is 5 pounds. We're starting to see seed size tighten up a little bit, but it is common to see, or it had been common to see pretty massive ranges in seed size from, 3 grams per thousand up to 7 grams per thousand. So, it's like comparing poppy seeds to potatoes. This is, if seeded at the same rate, we're getting vastly different seeds per acre in those scenarios. So the point of this is if we can optimize per field based on known emergence or estimated emergence values and based on plant density and that seed size, there is real potential for seed cost savings. So what we're looking at here is a 4.2 grams per thousand. Apologize again. Hopefully somebody's really good at math and figuring out what that is in the units that you folks use. $13 per pound seed cost. So if we went with 6 pounds, assuming a 60% emergence, we would achieve about 9 plants per square foot at $78 an acre. If we drop that to 5 pounds, also at 60% emergence, we'd end up with 7 plants, saving us, so now in that range of recommended, saving us $13 an acre. If we dropped again to 4 pounds at 60% emergence, we're still within our recommendation. We've saved $26. If we alternatively can improve our emergence, so if that, if in the past this person has been putting sulfur in the seed row, if we take that sulfur out and see improvements in our overall emergence, seed at 3 pounds, get 75% emergence, still have our 6 plants per square foot, we've now saved just about $40 an acre. So if we look at 160 acres, we've saved over $6,000. Actually, that number might not be right. It popped up on me. Let me just quickly do the math. I'm not that good at mental math. It doesn't sound right. Oh no, it's right. I thought it sounded high, but so it is high. It's a lot. I know what farm books look like at the end of the year, and that could be just a few rounding errors. But if you take that over an entire farm, it has the potential to be quite significant. And I'm not encouraging people to just drop their seeding rate. That should not be the takeaway here. But just know that there is variations in seed size, and we can, with still good agronomy, drop our seeding rates for in some situations, saving substantial money, and maybe in other fields we have to actually up it to get the plant stand that we need, and it's not, as we might typically think, costing us money. We've saved some here and had to spend more in other situations. And to further kind of drive this home a little bit for the real reason to optimize with small seed is that in a lot of the trial data that we have, we see that higher seeding rates often lead to higher mortality. So if we're unnecessarily seeding more than we really need to, you will very likely see higher seed mortality. Okay, so what's the main points here? Well, I think most importantly is we just need to try and optimize what we can control, because we just have no control over the flea beetles, the drought, etc. We have this one opportunity to establish a crop that is going to impact everything along the line. So I think if we're going to show some patience and some diligence at some point in the season, here's when we should be doing it. As we just know, and I'm sure you've had some experiences with this. I know that I've had maybe one too many, but a subpar seeding job is just going to haunt you for the rest of the season. And it's always like, man, I wish I did this, or I wish I did that. And good establishment just makes everything else that much easier. So, as we're timing fungicide operations or timing our in-crop herbicide swathing or straight cutting, it just makes those jobs seem like a walk in the park. Okay, so I would like to wish you all the best in 2022, and I'm crossing my fingers that we start to see more moisture here this winter, and we're facing something a little bit more optimistic as we roll into spring 2022.
All right, thank you, Angela. Is there any questions? Come on up. We got to speak into the mic. If you have a question, kind of head up towards the mic, please.
You mentioned the rapid defoliation in flea beetle in the spring from 25 to 50. Do you think they're becoming resistant to our insecticides on the seed?
So I don't know what your abundance of flea beetles is in Montana. We typically here in Western Canada have crucifer and striped flea beetles, and we know that the neonicotinoids that we use commonly in Canada, that the striped is more, it's not resistant to it, but it takes a lot more of that product to be effective against the striped flea beetle. So they can just do a pile of damage before that neonic is actually going to start doing its work against it. And we're also seeing a large shift in that flea beetle population, where we used to be predominantly crucifer. And now we're almost completely shifted the other way. We're seeing in a lot of regions where we're more predominantly striped. They feed a lot more aggressively. They come out sooner. So no, it's not that we have resistance that we know of to those insecticides, or either foliar or seed treatment. But the species itself and some of that shift in species is having a real detrimental impact on canola and control of those beetles.
Just a question I had, excuse me. Do you see any environmental issues like a cold spring or a hot, dry spring worse for flea beetles?
Yeah, so flea beetles will overwinter as adults, and so they kind of have like a temperature trigger to when they will emerge. So the spring conditions absolutely have an impact on their timing of emergence, and just how that lines up with the stage of canola can be a good thing or a bad thing, and it's just really difficult to predict. I think more so though, as relates to your question, is the efficacy of the seed treatment itself and environmental conditions. So how that seed treatment moves through the plant and the metabolism of the seed treatment in relation to different environmental conditions. And I'm not an expert in this, but the more extreme those conditions are, the more that detriment we're going to have on that uptake in metabolism. Sorry, I'm getting distracted because I see in the chat here that there is going to be flea beetles addressed in the next presentation. So maybe we should save these questions for the next presentation.
Okay, any other questions? Angela, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks again for having me.